So what exactly is the internet? Right? This isn't a question that we often ask because usually we just basically take the internet for granted, especially in this day and age, right? We use the internet on a hourly or minutely basis, and for the most part it just works, right? We don't really need to think about how it actually operates. But it is an important question to ask as a web designer, and especially as a web developer later. It's an important question to ask because if something breaks, how do we actually fix it? And furthermore, what can we learn about the functionality, how the internet actually works in order to inform our designs or make better design choices? Now, we don't need to know everything about the internet. Learning, all the history and how it was founded and all this other information isn't necessarily all that relevant, and you could certainly take a communications class that would cover that kind of content. But for this class, we do need to know at a very basic level how the internet works. So we have a couple of steps here. So we have our actual computer, right? So we have our computer, we're all set up, and we have our little keyboard, and we are accessing the internet on our screen. Within our computer, we have a web browser, so you might have something like Firefox or Internet Explorer, right? Or Safari. And all of these different applications, these are called browsers, allow us to browse the internet, right? Makes sense. So on your computer, you open up Firefox and you type in a web address. So you might type in, let's just say, google.com, right? It loads. Let's do a little arrow here. Loads for a little bit, or it might be almost instant depending on your internet speed, and you actually see google.com, right? It's got the address and it says Google, and you can start typing in and searching and doing your thing. Okay? And whenever you hit return on your search or enter, it loads the search results, right? You have a bunch of different search results, and you might pick a link. So let's say we select this one, and this opens up another new page. Let's say it opens up Netflix or something. All right. So what's happening here is we're using this computer to access the internet through a browser. The browser is going to a web address, and then on that web address, we're actually accessing a bunch of other web addresses, right? This is all pretty basic, and you're probably like, okay, yeah, I learned this in 8th grade or whatever. Sure. Well, let's talk about where all of these steps are actually happening and what's happening whenever we do each one of these things. So first, our computer is actually connected to a series of routers. On the most basic level, you might have a router in your home that your internet service provider gives you. It kind of looks like a little antenna box. It's probably got a bunch of lights on it, and every now and then something breaks, and whenever it breaks, you have to unplug it and plug it back in, right? We're all familiar with that scenario. Well, the router is actually connected to a bunch of other routers, right? There's tons and tons and tons of routers. And what's happening is these are all connecting other routers together, and then finally connecting to a larger kind of what we might refer to as like a cloud. That's sort of the buzzword for it. But essentially this is, at its very base, the internet. It's a bunch of interconnected computers. So whenever you connect to the internet, your internet service provider, your ISP, so Comcast or whoever you're paying the bills to, is giving you a router, or you have your own router, and you are then accessing a bunch of other systems. Okay? So that's at the very basic level. We open up a browser, so this is an application, right? And these all actually work a little bit differently, and whenever we get deep into web design and web development, you're going to find that you're going to need to develop specifically for each one. Now, this has changed a lot very, very recently, where it's now much easier to develop across the board, but things still might look a little bit different in Safari than they do in Firefox. Okay, so this level we all kind of understand. This is an application that we open on our computer, which basically just makes this part a lot easier. So we're typing in this google.com web address, right? So this is a URL or an address. We use those terms interchangeably. And what this is actually doing is it's actually accessing a bunch of numbers that are kind of hard to read. So this might look like this. All right, so this might be, I don't know what the Google IP address is, but this might actually be the address of Google. And whenever we type in google.com, what it's really saying to the computer is, hey, actually go to this, all right? But let's just call it Google because this is a lot easier for a person to remember than 74.55.6.1 or whatever the actual address of Google is. IP addresses are basically how computers identify each other. So your computer at home might actually have a different IP address than your tablet or something else like that. So we don't need to know all this information, but basically an IP address is just kind of the actual address of the computer that we're accessing, and then this is the URL, or the more human readable version, is google.com. Whenever we type that in, what's actually happening here during this loading phase is we are accessing a special type of computer called a server. All right, I'm just going to draw kind of a regular computer. But in reality, what this really looks like is this. Right, and you've probably seen these on television series or, in documentaries or things like that. So these are all computers. Each one of these shelves is a different computer. And they're called servers because they run special software and they run in a very particular way. They don't run like your computer at home. They might be extremely expensive. Let's see if we can find an image of a Google server room. So we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of computers. They're in very special environments. It might be really cold to keep them running fast. The wiring can get very complicated, but basically it's all these computers kind of linked together. What's happening is our computer is accessing that server and downloading this information. Okay, so it's downloading it, then we actually see the web page. All right, so I'm kind of sending what's called a request to this address, to google.com, and I'm asking, hey, give me your web page. And they say, okay, here it is. And we download it from them. Now, this all happens lightning fast, right? So wherever the Google server room is, we're downloading information from them very, very quickly, and it's being kind of routed through all these other computers, through this internet, right, of linked computers to get to us. So really, we're actually just accessing another computer in a sense. But again, that's called a server. Whenever we upload our own web pages, we'll upload them to a server as well. Now, what gets downloaded is this web page, Google, right? And what this actually is a bunch of code and a bunch of images and a bunch of graphics and animations, content, right? There's a bunch of content. And this content could be, or usually is, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, PHP, tons and tons and tons of different languages, programming languages, and content that's all grabbed and then displayed to us. Okay, this is a really important concept. Every web page is actually a bunch of text. It's a bunch of text files that tell our computer how to render this. So the browser basically is downloading a text file that says, hey, place this logo here and color it this way. And hey, put this box here, and whenever we click on it, it has a drop shadow. And in fact, on almost every browser, you can right-click and say Inspect Element, or you might want to say like Developer View, and we can actually view the text that makes up this website. So here's the text that makes up Google. Right, this is the code. So this is an HTML document. See, it says doc type HTML. It's kind of highlighting different things as I go over different areas. But this is all the content that makes up Google. So our computer is requesting this. It downloads this text file, this .html file, and then that text file gets reinterpreted by our browser. That's really important to remember. Everything you see on the internet is actually made up of this text, this special code, such as HTML, which we'll get into what these mean a little bit later, and that's being re-rendered by our computer. Finally, whenever we click a link, it's then redirecting us to a different website. Right, so this redirected us to Netflix. So that is really the basic structure of how the internet works. We're not going to get into too much detail, but basically you have a whole huge network of millions of computers connected together. That's all being poured through your internet service provider to your router. That's then being displayed on your computer. And then we use a browser, a special type of application that basically is able to access the internet. We give it an address that we want to go to. The address is then that's essentially sending a request to a server. The server we're saying, can we download this? The server says, yes, you can. And then it displays to us this special kind of content that's made up of a bunch of text, a bunch of code.